Hello and welcome. My name is Evgeny Rusakov and you're watching TVP World Interview from Vilnius. Belarusian journalist and former editor-in-chief of Nechta Telegram channel, Roman Protasevich, has recently given an interview to a well-known Russian journalist, Ksenia Sobchak. To discuss this interview, its actors, goals and many more, we are joined today by the human rights defender from Center Vesna, Kanstantsin Staradubets. Hello, Konstantin, and very glad to see you here with us today.
Hello, Evgeny.
So, this interview is called How to Stop Being Afraid of and Start Loving Lukashenko. So, quite a name for such an interview. So, what audience is this interview for?
Well, you're right. The name is shocking.
It is.
And the reference is also unusual. I mean, Kubrick's masterpiece, and that makes Lukashenko being equated to a nuclear bomb in a way,
yes,
which is absurd and crazy, considering the circumstances of today's world. It is, in the first place, for the audience of Ksenia Sobchak.
Okay.
Because it is her channel, her people, her audience that she probably has, definitely has. But it is also a co-production in a way. It is meant for people inside and outside of Belarus.
Okay.
I would say more outside, to show that there is still room for civilized, which is not civilized, discussion, dialogue on topics which essentially have been tabooed in today's Belarus. Political prisoners, violence, the landing of the Ryanair plane, they have not been discussed that much in the Belarusian society, which has been paralyzed by fear. So it's, in a way, something, at least something, where you can hear some things that are not usually mentioned.
Okay, so now you tell me then, will citizens of Belarus really stop being afraid of and start loving their president Alexander Lukashenko?
Absolutely not. If we judge the success of this interview by that factor, forcing people to love Lukashenko, no, it failed. The interview failed, Sobchak failed, and Protasevich failed. You cannot force anyone to love you by force.
Exactly.
Because civilized people call it rape. And Protasevich, their Protasevich we saw in this interview, he is definitely, apparently forced to love, to show the regime. He's humble, he's meek, he's insecure. This is not what the regime would want people to see in people who suddenly change their minds and start loving the authorities.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Then there's another interesting question to my mind is, why did this interview showed up at this specific moment, just a few months before the presidential elections in Belarus?
Yeah, the timing is appalling. The interview was released just a few days before the date of the elections.
Exactly,
yeah,
yes.
And of course, that context, the background of upcoming elections is very important. It looks like, and also the 4 waves of releases of political prisoners that happened during the summer and fall, they are also important in this context, because the things that were discussed during this interview and the things that Protasevich himself said after the interview, they are directly related to the fate of political prisoners in Belarus. He actually announced his plans to be involved in the authorities' scheme to whitewash their image.
I'm really interested. How do you think it's going to be? I mean, how do you think it is going to look like?
Well, actually, he said some details about how it's going to look. He's going to interview people who have been disloyal to the authorities, but then they changed their minds and started to love the
And
regime.
stood on the path of loving the regime.
Right.
Why is Lukashenko's regime still using Protasevich? Is he still valuable?
His value is diminishing, apparently. It is. But the amount of resources that were invested in Protasevich.
Exactly. Let's remember that Ryanair flight.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, and now it's quite evident that it was not worth it. They were going to make a powerful propaganda person out of Protasevich, but he's too weak to be one. So as a result, what we can see today is probably the last attempts to make at least something out of him for their own advantage. And as I said, it will be connected with the political prisoners and people persecuted for political reasons.
Okay, let's talk about another actor of this interview, Ksenia Sobchak, which is, some call her journalist, you called her blogger. What's her role in this interview?
Well, yeah, I would object to calling her a journalist because what we saw, this interview is a parody. That's not journalism. She's not asking the most important questions about the physical and psychological violence that Protasevich has gone through. And he was definitely beaten, probably tortured, to be broken. There were bruises on his face after his arrest. We saw that in the video footage aired by the propaganda. Because that would be the most important question. He was beaten to be broken, and that's the nature of this government. It uses violence on a systemic level towards its citizens to break them, to force them to love Lukashenko, which is impossible, as we found out.
In one of the comments under this interview, I've read that famous George Orwell's 1984. In the end, the main hero started loving the big brother. So, and they said that this is a kind of a Roman Protasevich is like that hero from that 1984.
Yeah, in a way, it's the same. Yeah, I mean, but I doubt that he really loves the regime.
Well, yes.
Because that's a theater. That's a theater. He's an actor.
Another interesting appearance in this interview is a Belarusian propagandist Grigory Azarenak. So why would Ksenia Sobchak invite that gentleman to this interview?
Well, it's a mystery because he's not the main hero, the main character of this interview.
But still, he took like a big part of that interview.
Yes, but from the things that caught my eye, it's quite apparent that she was mocking him, and he looked pathetic. I mean, he's disgusting. I mean, as a person. But the way he looked in this interview is even below that image of him. Sobchak simply humiliated him.
So do you think this was the main reason?
Right.
Not humiliating Roman Protasevich?
No. Again, the way Protasevich was shown, depicted in this interview, was a broken, insecure, humble person, while Azarenak is a disgusting propaganda guy with no humanity, ruthless, swearing, and so on and so forth.
Then who is Ksenia Sobchak in this interview?
Well, she's a propaganda person too, but only working for the propaganda of Russia.
Could you say that this interview literally proved that Ksenia Sobchak is Kremlin's mouthpiece?
Yeah, in a way she is. I mean, that's probably she was not hired or made to do that when she started her career as a vlogger. But what she's doing today is very similar to playing under the playbook of the Kremlin.
But still, I have to mention that during this interview, I paid attention that about war in Ukraine, she calls war a war, not a special military operation. And she says some things that other propagandists in Russia are not allowed to say?
Yeah, on the surface, there are some things that are quite shocking to me, a Belarusian, because those words cannot be pronounced in Belarusian media by anyone. It's criminalized. While Sobchak definitely...
Dictator, for example. Simple stuff.
Right. Well, Sobchak is allowed to do that. But it only shows that the amount of freedom of speech, at least on the surface, is a bit higher in Russia, in today's Russia. Because those bloggers with millions of viewers, subscribers, are simply tolerated by the Kremlin. Because they
let them speak what they speak.
Right. Because they
if they don't get too many audience, they are not that dangerous.
They are not perceived as dangerous.
As a threat
to the regime.
Exactly.
That's the answer.
Okay, I looked up the comments under this interview. So one of them I'd like to read to you. So, as a former Belarusian political prisoner, I will say this. I feel very sorry for Roman, and I can imagine what he went through. And I do not judge him and never will. God give Roman strength, physical and mental health. And there's loads of comments like this under this interview. So how would you explain that?
Well, again, it makes sense because of the Protasevich we saw in this interview. People feel sorry for him. He's a hostage. He's a broken person. It's about empathy. And this comment that you refer to, it's by a former political prisoner.
A person that knows what she speaks about.
Right. That person was inside a prison run by Lukashenko. And he knows what a person is subjected to once he's labeled as a disloyal citizen. It's violence, it's humiliation, it's starvation, a lot of things that make a person weak, or breaking them. So that's why people sympathize with Protasevich, and it's quite natural. He's a hostage.
My final question then. So who is Roman Protasevich? Is he a hostage, as you said, or is he a Lukashenko's regime's mouthpiece?
Well, two in one, in a way. He is a hostage.
How come this goes together?
Because he is a hostage by essence, in his essence. He is a hostage. He was forced. It was not his own choice, free will, to remain in Belarus and do what he is forced to do. So he is a hostage. But at the same time, he is doing things that are helping the propaganda, or expected to help, because his work is so poor. I would like to say that he is not a mouthpiece of the regime, because he is not, unlike Azaronek, he is not used in that role on a regular basis. And the things that he said in the interview, he is very cautious about picking words, selecting phrases.
For sure.
So that a propaganda guy in today's Belarus would not be that cautious. And Azaronek is a very good example of that.
As a human rights defender, what could you say in general about this interview?
Well, in one word, it is disgusting. As I said, it is a parody of journalism, interviewing a hostage, making him say things that he does not believe in. He's trapped inside the system. I don't know, it's just, you name a right or a freedom, and it's violated, each and every one, by doing this interview, by the story, this disgusting story of Protasevich himself. Violence, abuse of power, and many other things that just cannot be tolerated in a civilized society.
Konstantin, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for this in-depth analysis of this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to remind our viewers that our guest for today was a human rights defender from Center Vesna, Kanstantsin Staradubets. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us.